The Omega Line had been humanity's final defense for centuries, a system of colossal stations and automated war machines that stretched across the galaxy, designed to stand against the alien X-Car, a race of ruthless conquerors that had nearly wiped out humanity once before. But now, the line was crumbling. Each station had fallen, one by one, to the X-Car's overwhelming numbers and advanced technology. Omega Station 001, the last operational outpost, was all that remained. Its commander, Captain Leela Drake, stood at the heart of the station's control center, watching as the main screen flickered with incoming data. Status report, Leela barked, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. X-Car fleet has entered the sector. Lieutenant Nyla reported from the communications console. They're advancing fast. Shields are holding. But for how long? We don't know. Leela nodded grimly, her mind racing. They had anticipated this day for years. The X-Car would come. They always did. But the sheer scale of their invasion was unlike anything they had faced before. The station's automated defense systems were struggling, barely keeping the invaders at bay. Their once advanced technology was now obsolete against the X-Car's relentless push. Divert all available power to the outer shields, Leela ordered. We need more time to prepare the final defense. She turned toward the station's central command, where a massive countdown clock was ticking down relentlessly. If the X-Car managed to breach the last line of defense, the station would self-destruct, wiping them all out in a fiery explosion. It was a fail-safe built into every Omega Line station, a last-ditch effort to take the invaders down with them. But Leela wasn't ready to give up yet. The lights flickered, and the station's AI systems hummed ominously. The X-Car were using a new form of electronic warfare, one that disabled automated defenses and disrupted human control. Leela slammed her fist on the console, frustration boiling over. They had only moments before they would be overrun. Captain, the X-Car are using a jamming signal. They've hacked into our communication systems. Nyla shouted, panic creeping into her voice. We can't contact the other stations. Leela's jaw clenched. The idea of fighting this battle alone was terrifying, but she had no choice. Omega Station 001 was the last bastion of humanity. If she fell, the entire galaxy would fall with her. Reroute all energy to the weapons systems, Leela commanded, her tone cold and calculated. Activate the planetary defense lasers. If we can't stop them from the outside, we'll take the fight to them. She took a deep breath, knowing what that order meant. The station's core was powered by a volatile, unstable energy source, the heart of Omega. If they used it in the planetary lasers, the energy spike would destabilize the core, triggering the station's self-destruction sooner than expected. But if they didn't act now, they wouldn't have a chance to make it out alive. As the countdown continued, the first wave of X-Car forces breached the outer hull. Huge hulking aliens, their bodies encased in battle armor, began to pour into the lower levels. The ground shook as the first explosions rocked the station. Leela ran down the narrow corridors, heading for the central control room. The automated turrets had already been activated, firing at any moving target, but they were ineffective against the X-Car's advanced technology. In the control room, she saw the same thing she'd feared. The massive energy surge from the heart of Omega was growing, a pulse of light emanating from deep within the station. It was unstable. It was building. We're running out of time, Nyla whispered, standing by the control panels, watching the energy readings skyrocket. Leela glanced over at the main screen. X-Car warships filled the view, thousands of them, all headed toward Omega Station. The odds were impossibly slim. The end was near, and she could feel it in her bones. Yet, something unexpected happened. The station's AI, an ancient and highly intelligent system, flashed a warning on the screen, an encrypted message that was never supposed to be seen. Leela's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. The warning wasn't about the X-Car. It was from someone. No, something. On the inside of the station. A signal had come through, One meant to stop her. "What the hell?" Leela muttered. Nyla leaned in, her voice tense. "Captain, that message. It wasn't from the X-car. It's from within the station." Suddenly, the realization hit Lila with the force of a freight train. The station was sabotage. Someone was actively trying to prevent her from triggering the final defense. She turned toward Nyla, her face now a mask of fury. "Lock down all access points. Whoever's behind this, I want them found. Now." The fate of humanity was slipping away, and Captain Layla Drake was not about to let anyone, human or alien, decide it for her. The station was in chaos. The walls of Omega Station 001 rattled with the force of incoming X-car fire, each explosion reverberating like a death knell in the halls. Lila's heart raced as she stormed through the station's labyrinthine corridors, her boots thundering against the metal floor. The station's systems were still running on emergency power, but every moment that passed brought them closer to total failure. "Captain, we've located the breach in the communications network." Nyla's voice crackled through her comms, strained but resolute. "It's coming from Sector 17, deep in the lower levels. That's where the sabotage originated." Leela didn't waste a second. She had suspected something was wrong ever since the encrypted message had appeared on the station's main screen, but hearing Nyla's confirmation set her instincts ablaze. There was a traitor on board, and they had been planning this for a long time. "Seal off the upper levels," Leela ordered, her tone cold and sharp. "If we lose control of the lower sections, we'll be surrounded. I'll head to Sector 17 myself." As Leela and her squad made their way deeper into the station, she could feel the weight of betrayal hanging over them like a shadow. Omega Station 001 was humanity's last defense, and now it was compromised from within. But the identity of the traitor was still unclear. Was it a single rogue element, or was this a coordinated effort? The possibilities were endless, but one thing was certain: whoever was behind this had far-reaching influence. They reached Sector 17 just as another tremor shook the station. The X-car had made landfall. The ground quaked with the force of their heavy boots as they infiltrated the lower decks. It wouldn't be long before the station's automated turrets were overwhelmed. Leela drew her sidearm, her eyes narrowing as she approached the entrance to the sabotage zone. She motioned for her team to spread out and cover the hallways as she entered the darkened room. The flickering lights cast long shadows across the walls, and the air was thick with the smell of burning circuitry. Whoever had been working here had made sure their tracks were well covered. Suddenly, a low voice echoed from the shadows. "I knew you'd come, Layla." Leela's heart skipped. She recognized the voice instantly. It was General Creel, the man who had been like a father to her, the commander of the Omega Line forces, the one she trusted above all others. But now, as his figure emerged from the darkness, there was no warmth in his eyes, only cold calculation. "Creel," Leela said through gritted teeth, "what are you doing here? Why sabotage the station?" Creel stepped forward, his hand resting on a console that controlled the station's core systems. "Humanity has no future, Leela," he said, his voice laced with a bitter edge. "Not as it is. We're outmatched. The X-car are unstoppable. They'll wipe us out, and you can't change that. I've made a deal with them." Leela's mind raced as the word sank in. A deal. "You're betraying us. To the X-car." A hollow laugh escaped Creel's lips. "You think I betrayed humanity? No, Layla. I'm saving it. If we surrender now, if we cooperate, they'll let us live. They'll let us survive. The alternative is extinction. You know it's true." Leela's grip on her weapon tightened, fury rising within her chest. "You've lost your mind. The X-car won't show mercy. They never have." Creel's expression hardened. "They don't have to. We'll work with them. They'll use us as their allies, their vassals. But humanity will survive. And in time, we'll rebuild, rise up again. We'll be their equals." Leela shook her head in disbelief. This wasn't the man she had admired, the one who had taught her everything she knew. The Creole she had followed had always stood for humanity's defiance, for fighting back against impossible odds. This was something else. He had given up. And in doing so, he was condemning millions of innocent people to a life of subjugation. "I can't let you do this," Leela said, her voice steely. "The X-Car will never keep their word. They'll kill us all once we've outlived our usefulness. Then you'll die for nothing." Creole spat, his eyes flashing with desperation. "I'm trying to save us, Leela. You don't see the bigger picture." Without another word, Creole activated a nearby console. Sparks flew as the sabotage to the station's core systems intensified. The countdown to self-destruction accelerated, flashing a red warning on every screen. The moment of truth was near. Leela's pulse quickened. She had only one choice left. "We'll see who's right," she said, raising her weapon, the air thick with tension. "But it won't be you." Before Creole could respond, Leela fired, hitting the console with pinpoint precision. Sparks erupted, and the countdown stalled, but only temporarily. The station was dying, and they had only minutes before it all came crashing down. The station's corridors were eerily quiet now, save for the distant hum of failing systems and the crackling of emergency lights. Lila stood over the now smoldering console, the remnants of Creole's treachery still fresh in her mind. She had stopped the sabotage, but at what cost? The countdown had stalled, but it wouldn't be for long. The clock was ticking, and soon, the entire station would explode. Omega Station 001 was slipping through her fingers, and Creole's twisted vision was now the least of her worries. "Captain," Nyla's voice crackled through her comms, snapping Leela out of her thoughts. "We've got more trouble. The X-Car are inside the lower levels. They've breached the outer defense perimeter. We're completely exposed. They're pushing in fast." Leela cursed under her breath and glanced back at the console. The sabotage had done more damage than she could see. The outer shields were barely holding, and the station's weapon systems were offline. Even if they managed to repel the X-Car for a while, it wouldn't matter. The station was on borrowed time. "We don't have much longer," Leela muttered to herself, her voice barely audible in the silence. "We need to get control of the station's weapon systems, or this will all be for nothing." She looked at the map on her wrist terminal. There was one last location that could still give them a chance. The Weapons Command Center, deep within the core of the station. If she could get there and manually reinitialize the weapons systems, they might have enough firepower to turn the tide. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The lower levels were crawling with X-Car forces, and time was running out. "Prepare for a full-on assault," Leela said to her remaining squad members, her voice resolute. "We need to fight our way to Weapons Command, and we need to do it now." The team moved swiftly through the narrow hallways, weapons raised, moving like a well-oiled machine. Lila's heart raced as they advanced. She could feel the pressure mounting with every step. The station's walls groaned under the weight of the X-Car invasion, but she refused to let them fall here. Not while there was still a chance to turn the tide. They reached the access point to the lower levels, where the first wave of X-Car had broken through. Lila signaled for the squad to take cover behind the reinforced door, knowing the X-Car would be waiting on the other side. She could hear their guttural growls and the sound of heavy footsteps. "On my signal," Leela whispered, her hand poised on the control panel. "We breached together. No hesitation." The squad readied their weapons. Lila could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, but she kept her focus sharp. She had trained for moments like this. There was no room for fear now, only action. With a sudden press of the button, the door slid open and the squad charged forward, weapons firing. The X-Car soldiers were caught off guard, but quickly retaliated with their advanced plasma rifles. The station's dim lighting flickered, casting long shadows across the corridor as explosions erupted. Lila and her team fought through the chaos, each step more perilous than the last. "Keep moving," Leela shouted, ducking behind a pillar to avoid a pulse blast. The X-car were relentless, pushing forward in waves, their armor reflecting the flickering lights of the emergency systems. As they moved deeper into the lower levels, Lila's mind raced. She knew that the longer they stayed here, the more likely the X-car would reinforce their position. The weapons command center was just ahead, but it was heavily fortified. The X-car would expect them to make a move soon, and they'd have the advantage in close-quarters combat. There, Leela said, pointing toward a large blast door ahead. That's our target. The squad sprinted toward the door, but before they could reach it, a massive X-car war machine appeared around the corner, its jagged, insect-like body covered in thick armor, and its weapons mounted on its back. The creature let out a shrill screech, charging toward them with terrifying speed. "Take cover," Leela ordered, her voice sharp as a razor. The squad scattered, firing at the creature's vulnerable spots. The war machine was tough, but not invincible. Leela fired a precise shot at its exposed power core, and the creature let out a roar of pain as it staggered back, sparks flying from its joints. But the X-car were relentless. More of their forces poured in from all directions, closing the gap and flanking the squad. Lila's heart hammered in her chest as she realized they were surrounded. There was no way they could fight their way out of this without a plan. "Get to the door. Now," Leela shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She had to get them to the weapons command, no matter the cost. If they didn't control the station's weapons, there would be no way to repel the X-car. They would lose everything. With a final, desperate push, the squad reached the blast door. Lila quickly accessed the manual override, and the door rumbled open. They rushed inside, sealing the door behind them. They were inside the weapons command center, but the battle was far from over. Leela turned to face her squad, sweat dripping down her face, her breath heavy. "We're not done yet," she said, her voice hard with determination. "We take back this station, or we die trying." The blast doors of the weapons command center slammed shut behind them, the heavy clang echoing through the steel walls. Lila's heart raced, but there was no time for hesitation. They had made it this far, but the X-car forces were closing in, and Omega Station 001's core was on the brink of collapse. The weapons systems were their last hope. "Secure the perimeter," Leela barked as she sprinted to the central control console. "Nyla, initiate the defense sequence. We need everything operational in 5 minutes or we're done." Nyla, her face pale but determined, nodded and immediately began typing commands into the console. The room was filled with the low hum of energy systems struggling to stay online, the station's battered infrastructure barely holding together. Leela didn't waste time looking back. She knew Nyla had the technical expertise to bring the weapons systems online. Instead, she turned to the rest of the squad, who were taking defensive positions near the doors and windows, guns raised, eyes scanning for threats. The X-car wouldn't give them any breathing room. They knew the command center was their last line of defense. "Stay sharp," Leela said, crouching next to a weapons terminal. "We're about to make a stand." The squad responded with firm nods, their eyes steely with resolve. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but the fight was far from over. Lila's mind raced through every possible scenario, calculating the odds. They had no reinforcements, no backup. The last 2 stations had fallen, and the fleet of X-car warships hovering above the station was more than enough to wipe them out. It was clear. Omega Station 001 was humanity's last stand. Nyla's voice interrupted Layla's thoughts. "Weapons systems are coming online, but there's a problem with the targeting algorithms. They've been corrupted. It'll take an extra few minutes to get full accuracy." Leela cursed under her breath, her mind quickly calculating the consequences of the delay. "We don't have that long," she muttered, "but it's the only shot we've got." She turned back to her squad. The X-car were getting closer, and she could hear their heavy footsteps, their guttural grunts, echoing through the station. They were in the walls now, moving through maintenance shafts and service tunnels to flank them. There was no escaping the inevitable confrontation. The lights in the command center flickered as another tremor shook the station. Lila's eyes darted to the countdown clock on the wall. 30 minutes. Then the station would detonate, taking them all with it. "We need to hold them off for another 30 minutes, Lila said, her voice cold and commanding. "Do not let them breach this room." She could see the grim resolve on her team's faces. This was it, the final stand. The squad was all that stood between the X-Car and the rest of humanity. But as Lila looked out across the command center, she could see a flicker of hope. If they managed to regain control of the weapons systems, they might be able to take out enough of the X-Car forces to buy humanity a chance. But they had to make it through the next 30 minutes first. The doors to the command center suddenly rattled as an explosion rocked the station. A massive thud echoed through the walls as a group of X-Car soldiers slammed against the outer door. Their alien screeches reverberated through the chamber, sending chills down Lila's spine. "Brace yourselves," Lila shouted, her eyes narrowing. She grabbed a plasma rifle from a weapons rack and charged toward the door with her squad following close behind. "They're coming in hot." The doors groaned as the X-Car slammed against them with all their might. Lila could hear the scraping of metal as the aliens attempted to breach the reinforced door. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but she pushed it aside. Her focus was absolute. The countdown continued to tick, counting down to the end of everything. Lila's breath quickened, but she fought to stay calm. The X-Car would not take the station, not today, not while she was still breathing. "They're about to break through," one of the squad members yelled. Lila stood tall, her stance unwavering as she raised her weapon. "Hold your fire until I give the signal. We need to hit them with everything we've got when that door opens." Seconds felt like hours as the door began to bend, the metal warping under the force of the X-Car's assault. Lila's muscles tensed, waiting for the right moment. Finally, with a deafening crash, the doors buckled under the pressure and flew open, sending a blast of air into the room. A wave of X-Car soldiers flooded into the command center, their hulking forms moving fast and deadly. The room erupted into chaos as the squad unleashed a storm of fire. Lila fired, her shots precise, taking down one X-Car after another. Her team was quick, too, each squad member moving with deadly precision, targeting weak points in the X-Car's armor and relentlessly pushing forward. The aliens screeched as they fell, but the assault didn't stop. More X-Car poured through the breach, their numbers overwhelming. Nyla's voice rang out from across the room. "Weapon systems are online. Targeting algorithms are stable." Lila's heart skipped a beat. The weapons were ready. "Everyone, fall back to the control panel," she shouted. "We need to hit them with the full force of the station's artillery." The squad regrouped, forming a defensive line around Nyla as she activated the station's planetary weapons. Lila watched as the targeting systems locked onto the advancing X-Car. It was a last-ditch effort, a final gamble. With a final, steady breath, Lila pressed the command button. The room was filled with the deafening hum of the station's weapon systems coming online. The walls seemed to shake with the sheer power of the energy surging through them. Lila's heart raced as she stood beside Nyla, her eyes fixed on the massive targeting console. She knew this was their one shot. If the weapons didn't make a direct hit, if the X-Car didn't break before their defenses were overwhelmed, humanity's last bastion would fall. Nyla's fingers flew over the holographic interface, her face tense but focused. "Weapon systems locked on," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "Initiating the strike in 3, 2, 1. Lila's breath caught in her throat as a series of violent flashes illuminated the room. Outside, on the station's outer hull, massive energy cannons came to life, firing concentrated beams of plasma and antimatter. Each shot was a massive explosion, lighting up the station's exterior in blinding flashes. The X-Car forces outside the station didn't stand a chance. The beams tore through their war machines and infantry, ripping apart their ranks with unrelenting precision. Layla watched as the first volley hit its mark, sending shockwaves through the station's interior. The control room's lights flickered momentarily, but the weapons continued to fire. The X-Car were being torn apart, their warships and soldiers obliterated in seconds. Direct hits, Nyla confirmed. They're retreating. But Layla didn't allow herself to relax. This wasn't over. The station's countdown was still ticking down, and while the X-Car were taking heavy losses, their numbers were still overwhelming. The energy pulse that had blasted through their forces would buy them some time, but not enough to win the battle. The station was falling apart faster than they could fight. "Get ready," Layla shouted to her squad, who were still holding their positions, firing on any X-Car that managed to slip past the assault. "We've got another wave incoming." The explosion of fire and light outside the station had slowed the X-Car's advance, but their larger warships were still intact, their firepower enough to wipe out what remained of the station's defenses. Layla knew they couldn't count on the artillery much longer. The door to the weapons control room groaned under pressure as another X-Car assault team tried to breach. The ground shook again as an explosion sent a ripple through the entire command center. The emergency lights flickered again, casting the room in flashes of red. Layla's squad reacted instinctively, moving into defensive positions around the room. The door was buckling under the pressure. "They'll be here any second," Layla said, her voice calm but commanding. "Prepare to hold your ground. We don't have another option. If we don't hold this room, it's over." The X-Car were close now, their screeches growing louder with each passing second. The sound of their war machine's footsteps echoed through the hallway, like a drumbeat of impending doom. Layla's fingers tightened around the handle of her plasma rifle as she looked to her squad. Every one of them was battered and bloodied, but there was no question in their eyes. They would stand and fight until their last breath. The doors finally gave way with a violent crash, and the first wave of X-Car soldiers flooded into the room. The squad opened fire, unleashing a torrent of energy blasts. The X-Car rushed forward, but their numbers weren't enough to overpower the humans' firepower. Layla moved with a calculated precision, her shots hitting their marks one after another, taking down X-Car warriors as they charged. But for every X-Car they cut down, more came. The room became a whirlwind of plasma fire and alien screams. Layla could feel the heat of the battle around her, the sweat dripping down her brow, the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She fired with deadly accuracy, each shot bringing them closer to victory or to their demise. "More coming in from the vents," shouted one of the squad members. Layla's mind raced as she realized the full extent of the threat. The X-Car were using every possible entry point to overwhelm them. The situation was deteriorating quickly. They couldn't hold forever. "Get to the backup generators," Layla ordered. "We can't rely on the main system anymore. If we can reroute power to the exterior cannons, we might be able to finish this." Nyla didn't hesitate. "I'm on it." As Nyla moved toward the backup control station, Layla and the rest of the squad continued their brutal defense. Every corner of the room became a battleground, every inch contested by X-Car soldiers eager to take their last stand against humanity. The countdown to self-destruction continued, ticking away relentlessly. Layla's eyes darted to the corner of the room where the timer was flashing red. 15 minutes. 15 minutes to either save humanity or die trying. The roar of a massive explosion shook the station again. This time, it was closer. Too close. "We need to buy more time," Layla shouted, locking eyes with Nyla. "Keep those cannons firing. We can't let up now." With a final surge of effort, Layla's squad held the line. The X-Car surged forward in waves, but each one was met with the full force of humanity's defiance. The blast doors were held, but for how long? It was a race against the clock, against the X-Car, against time itself. Nyla's voice broke through the chaos. "Backup generators online. Redirecting power to the exterior cannons. We have one more shot. Leela's heart pounded as she set her sights on the final wave of X-Car forces charging toward them. This was it. The last strike. They were about to give humanity its final chance. The station's walls groaned, a constant reminder that Omega Station 001 was on the edge of collapse. With every blast from the X-Car forces and every energy surge powering the exterior cannons, the countdown clock ticked down relentlessly. Leela felt the weight of time pressing on her chest as she stood at the front of the command center, the heat of the battle swirling around her. The backup generators had powered up just in time, redirecting energy to the exterior cannons. Nyla had worked miracles, but now it was up to them to make sure those final strikes hit their targets. The X-Car forces were thickening again, advancing through every possible breach. Their guttural screams reverberated through the station, a maddening sound that only fueled Lila's determination. They would not be the ones to break. "Keep it up," Leela yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We're almost there." Her squad's efforts were a blur, firing, reloading, moving in sync. The X-Car pushed harder, more desperately. There was no hesitation in their movements, their claws and weapons raised to overwhelm. Lila's pulse quickened as she fired again, another X-Car soldier falling in a flash of plasma. But for every X-Car that fell, another one seemed to take its place. Leela darted toward Nyla, who was hunched over a terminal, eyes flashing over multiple screens. Sweat drenched her brow, but she didn't stop. "We need the exterior cannons to hit precisely. This isn't enough firepower," Nyla said between breaths, her hands shaking from the strain. "I can't adjust the targeting algorithms for a wider range, not with the damage to the systems." Leela's mind raced, but she knew the problem well. The X-Car had positioned themselves in a way that the fire would have to hit them dead center. One wrong move, and the shot would miss. "Do what you can," Leela ordered, turning back to the battlefield. "We can't afford a miss." As Nyla adjusted the systems, Leela refocused on the front lines. The squad was holding their ground for now, but it was clear they were getting worn down. The X-Car seemed endless, an unyielding wave of soldiers and war machines pouring in from every direction. The blast doors that separated them from the rest of the station's corridors were barely holding. Another few minutes, and they would break through. Leela's hand gripped her rifle tighter. They couldn't let that happen. Not now. "We need a distraction," she said aloud. "We can't let them break through that door." One of her squad members, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, nodded grimly. "Leave it to me." Marcus moved quickly to one of the nearby storage units, pulling out a crate of explosive charges. Lila watched as he prepared them, his movements swift and sure. He glanced back at her. "I'll take care of it," Marcus said with a grim smile. "Cover me." Without another word, Marcus sprinted to the far side of the room, ducking behind a column. Lila's breath caught in her throat as she heard him planting charges near the perimeter. "Keep them busy," Marcus shouted. "I'll get the door." Leela shouted orders to her team. They focused fire on the X-Car soldiers that had pushed closest to the breach. The squad's shots rang out in perfect unison, tearing through the X-Car with deadly accuracy. The alien soldiers roared as they fell, but they kept pushing forward, unfazed by the losses. Marcus finished setting the charges, and without warning, he detonated them. A massive explosion rocked the station, sending a shockwave through the command center. The X-Car closest to the door were obliterated in an instant, and the force of the explosion sent others scrambling back. Leela took advantage of the momentary lull. "Move forward," she ordered. The squad advanced quickly, pushing the X-Car back and forcing them into a retreat. For the first time in what felt like hours, the pressure eased, even if just for a moment. "Status," Leela called out to Nyla. Nyla was hunched over the terminal again, her fingers flying over the keys. "I've rerouted the targeting systems. It's as good as it's going to get." Leela's eyes flicked to the countdown clock. 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes until the station's core detonated. It was now or never. "Let's do this," Leela said firmly. She turned to her squad. "Everyone, take cover. We're about to bring down the house." The exterior cannons had been retargeted, their immense energy pulsating with lethal force. The station shuddered under the power, and a low hum filled the air as the final shot was ready. Leela's fingers twitched over the controls as she took a deep breath, locking eyes with Nyla. There was no turning back now. With a deep, steadying exhale, Leela pressed the final command. The station's exterior erupted with a series of explosive pulses. Massive plasma beams shot out from the weapon arrays, slashing through space. The first hit was clean, obliterating the X-Car's lead warship. Then came another and another. The X-Car forces scattered as their ships were torn apart by the concentrated blasts. But there was no time to celebrate. The countdown continued, and they were still not safe. They had dealt the X-Car a devastating blow. But Omega Station 001 was still moments from self-destruction. They had a brief respite, but the clock was ticking louder than ever. "Fall back to the evacuation zones," Leela ordered. "We've done what we can. Now it's time to survive." The squad turned and rushed toward the emergency exit, moving as quickly as their exhausted bodies would allow. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning circuitry. The station's corridors were dark, only lit by the flickering emergency lights. Leela's eyes remained fixed on the countdown. They had minutes left. Would they escape in time? Or would this be the end of humanity's last stand? The air was thick with acrid smoke, and the dim emergency lights flickered in a stuttering rhythm as Leela and her squad raced down the corridors. The countdown to the station's self-destruction was relentless, a ticking reminder that their window for survival was rapidly closing. 10 minutes had turned to 5, and now the numbers were even lower. Leela's breath was labored, but there was no time to stop. No time for fatigue to take hold. Their mission had been successful in halting the X-Car advance, but the station was still doomed. Omega Station 001 was designed to implode in the event of a critical breach, and that breach had already occurred. The core would destabilize within minutes. It was only a matter of time before the entire station would be lost to the void. "Keep moving," Leela shouted, her voice sharp as she led her team through the narrow passageways. "We've got 5 minutes to make it to the AVAC shuttles, if we're not there in time." "We're dead," Nyla interrupted, her face grim. She didn't need to say more. Everyone knew the stakes. As they rounded a corner, the shrill screech of X-Car war machines echoed through the corridors, their guttural growls and heavy footsteps growing louder. They weren't alone anymore. The X-Car had regrouped after the devastating blast, and now they were on the hunt, hungry for vengeance. "Squad, take positions," Leela barked. They had no choice but to slow down and make a stand. If they didn't, the X-Car would catch up with them before they reached the escape pods. The squad quickly fanned out, taking cover behind reinforced metal columns and storage crates. Lila ducked behind a nearby corner, her rifle ready. The sound of the X-Car's footsteps grew louder, closer. The tension in the air was suffocating. The squad's breaths echoed in the cold, narrow passageways. Lila's hand gripped her rifle, her finger lightly touching the trigger as she awaited the inevitable. The X-Car were coming. There was no way they'd get to the evacuation shuttles without a fight. "They're close," Marcus muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He peeked around the corner, eyes scanning the hall for movement. Too damn close. Lila's mind raced. They were running out of time. She glanced at the countdown clock on her wrist. 3 minutes left. Just 3 minutes to clear the X-Car and make it to the shuttles. Then the first of the X-Car appeared. It was a hulking creature, its dark exoskeleton glistening in the dim light as it stomped forward, its massive weapon raised. Behind it, more X-Car soldiers emerged from the shadows, a relentless tide of armored warriors. Layla didn't wait for orders. With a swift motion, she popped out from behind cover and fired, her plasma rifle lighting up the corridor. The first X-Car soldier went down in a burst of sparks and fiery plasma, but the rest continued forward, undeterred by the loss. "Take them down," Leela shouted. "We need to clear this corridor. Now." The squad unleashed a barrage of fire. Plasma shots filled the hallway as the X-Car soldiers charged. But the aliens were relentless. No matter how many they cut down, more seemed to take their place. They were like an endless wave, pushing forward with the singular goal of annihilating them. Nyla's voice crackled over the comms. "Leela, the shuttles are just ahead, but we need to move now. The core's destabilizing." The urgency in Nyla's voice snapped Layla's focus back to the task at hand. "Fall back to the shuttles, now," she ordered. The squad regrouped and began to retreat, firing as they moved. They were making headway, but the X-Car were closing in fast. The sound of their heavy footsteps was deafening, and the shrill war cries of the aliens filled the air. There was no way they could hold them off much longer. Leela turned back to see Marcus leading the rear, firing his plasma rifle into the advancing aliens. His face was set in a grim expression as he shot down another X-Car soldier. "Hurry up," he yelled. "I can't hold them forever." Leela's heart pounded. The shuttle bay was just ahead. If they could make it to the door, they might be able to make a clean getaway. But the X-Car were too close now. The hallway was filling up with the alien menace, their long limbs reaching for anything in sight. Leela fired again, taking out another soldier, but they were getting overwhelmed. "Go, go, go!" Leela screamed as she sprinted ahead. The squad moved as quickly as they could, dodging blasts from the X-Car and returning fire. Every step forward was another step toward salvation, but every second brought the X-Car closer to catching them. They reached the shuttle bay door, but it was locked. "No!" Leela cursed, slamming her fist against the door control panel. "Come on, come on." Nyla was already working on the override from her terminal. Her hands were moving faster than Leela thought possible as she typed in the commands. The countdown on the core's explosion was now at just 1 minute. "Come on," Leela shouted, glancing over her shoulder at the growing wave of X-Car that was charging toward them. "Got it," Nyla yelled, and the shuttle bay door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Leela didn't wait for the others. She dove inside, and the rest of the squad followed. But the moment the door closed behind them, the bay was filled with the sounds of X-Car screeches as they reached the door too late. "We're not safe yet," Leela said, her voice taut with the threat of imminent danger. "Prepare for launch." As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Leela took one last look at Omega Station 001, now fading into the distance. It was a race against the clock. They had escaped, but they had no idea what awaited them beyond the station. The shuttle's engines hummed as it broke free from the collapsing station, the trembling structure of Omega Station 001 rapidly shrinking in the viewports behind them. Lila leaned back in her seat, her body still tense from the escape. The adrenaline that had carried her through the battle now drained away, leaving her feeling every bruise, every cut. But there was no time to rest. "Status?" she asked, her voice hoarse as she looked toward Nyla, who was monitoring the systems. "We're clear," Nyla reported, though her expression was far from relieved. "We made it out before the core went critical. Omega Station 001 is gone." The last words seemed to hang in the air. They'd accomplished the impossible. They had held their ground against the X-Car, fought through overwhelming odds, and escaped the destruction of the last human stronghold. But victory had come at a cost, and the weight of that hung heavily on Layla's mind. "We did it," said Marcus, his voice quiet as he leaned against the wall, still catching his breath. He hadn't let his guard down since the fight started, and he was still alert, eyes scanning every corner of the shuttle's interior. "I wasn't sure we were going to make it out alive." Leela didn't answer immediately. She didn't want to lie. Part of her had doubted too. They'd barely made it to the evacuation shuttles in time. The X-Car had pushed them to the brink. And for a moment, It seemed like they might be swallowed whole by the alien onslaught. But now, with Omega Station 001 a distant memory, they had won. Humanity had won. But at what cost? Leela's thoughts were interrupted by a soft peep from the console in front of Nyla. Her brow furrowed as she examined the readout. "Leela, you'd better see this," Nyla said, her voice tinged with something more than simple curiosity. Leela moved quickly to her side, peering over the terminal. "What is it?" "It's a distress signal," Nyla replied, typing rapidly on the screen. "I'm picking up a transmission. It's coming from, well, it's coming from Earth." Leela's breath caught in her throat. Earth, the birthplace of humanity. The cradle of their civilization. For all the horrors they had faced, for all the battles they had fought, Leela had never imagined the war would extend this far. "Is it a trap?" Marcus asked, suspicion thick in his voice. "It could be a false signal." "No," Nyla answered, shaking her head. "It's coming from an unregistered location. I'm cross-referencing the coordinates with what we have left of the planetary maps." Leela felt the air grow heavy in her chest. They had escaped the immediate danger, but this new revelation was a chilling reminder that the war wasn't over. Far from it. The X-Car had been relentless in their pursuit, and it seemed they had left no stone unturned. The transmission continued, static-filled but clear enough to make out one word: help. Leela's heart skipped a beat. The desperation in that single word was undeniable. Whoever was on the other side of that signal was in trouble, and there was no doubt in Leela's mind that the X-Car were involved. "We have to go," Leela said, her voice low and determined. There was no question. Earth was humanity's last chance. If they couldn't protect it, if they couldn't reach it in time, the war was as good as lost. Nyla didn't hesitate. "I'll plot a course, but we're going to need fuel and supplies. We don't have enough for a long journey." Leela turned to the rest of the crew. "We've got a few hours before we hit critical levels on our fuel reserves," she said. "We'll have to raid a nearby outpost to refuel. But no matter what it takes, we're going to Earth." Marcus nodded firmly, but his expression darkened. "The X-Car will be waiting for us. We're not the only ones heading there." Leela knew he was right. The X-Car were everywhere, and the transmission from Earth wasn't a beacon of hope. It was a call for help. Earth was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a battleground. "We won't be alone," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But we'll get there, and we'll fight like we always do." Nyla's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Course is set. I'm activating the FTL drive. We've got one shot at this." Leela sat back in her seat, gripping the armrests. The FTL drive whined to life, and the shuttle lurched as it jumped to faster-than-light speed. The stars outside the viewport stretched and blurred into long lines of light as the ship rocketed toward Earth. The silence in the shuttle was deafening. The weight of the situation, the gravity of their mission, settled over them like a dark cloud. They had escaped, but the war wasn't over. The X-Car were coming for Earth, and it was up to this ragtag group of survivors to protect humanity's last hope. Leela gazed out the viewport at the stars, the infinite stretch of space ahead of them. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The fight had taken everything from them: their homes, their families, their station, but humanity was still alive. The spirit of survival, the fire that burned in their hearts, was something the X-Car couldn't destroy. And as long as they had breath, as long as they had will, humanity would continue to fight.